What if I told you that right now, regardless of your belief or anyone's beliefs about what's going on between the U.S., Iran, and Israel, right, wrong, or indifferent, pro or con, what would you think if I told you that only one thing matters right now that will determine the future of probably our society, maybe the world, us as individuals? So much hinges on that. And that one fact is, what will the government of Iran or those who support the government of Iran and have the means to cause problems here in the U.S. and around the world, what will they or won't they do? That's all that matters right now. Hey everyone, Brian Duff here. In this episode of the Mind4Survival, I want to talk about the rising conflict with Iran and what it really means for people here at home. Not headlines, not political sound bites. I'm talking about a real world impact on your safety, your mindset, and your life. And I don't say that lightly, right? I spent years in the Middle East, right? If you know me from and I don't say that lightly. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you know I spent years in the Middle East overseeing the security for the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. I oversaw the guard force there. I've worked alongside people targeted. I've dealt with people who were killed by Iran's Quds force that were literally executed. I've seen the playbook and I've lived through the consequences over there. So today, I'm giving you my unfiltered perspective. And here's how I'm going to break it down. First, I want to talk about mindset. And I'll share how I think about Iran and why understanding the Iranian perspective matters if we want to make clear, informed decisions. Second, let's get into situational awareness. This is based on my Mind4Survival philosophy. Mindset, situational awareness, survival, safety, and self. M, 4 S's, right? So let's talk about situational awareness. I'll walk you through what's really happening behind the headlines, how we got here, and what might be coming, especially inside the U.S. That's so important to have a good situational awareness to understand all sides. The more we understand, the better the decisions we can make. Third, I'm going to talk about survival. What to do if this blows back into us here in the U.S. and you find yourself or we find ourselves caught in the fallout. That's why we prepare. If something pops off, that can be anything from violence all the way down to just impact on the shelves, right? How do you react? What do we got to go on? Fourth, I'm going to talk about the safety aspect of this, and I'm going to get into some physical and mental preparedness tips for you to chew on, things to do that you can move as to chew on, and things you can do as we move on down this path to wherever it leads. Hopefully it backs off the cliff, right? And last, I'm going to talk about self, how to deal with all of this when it seems to be over the top, and maybe this is me projecting on you, right? But this stuff can get pretty heavy. We have a lot going on, man. It's been a busy year. It's been a busy several years. It doesn't seem like it's slowing down. So the point being, we prepare so that we can live a good life and we can have a happy life. And we need to work on making sure that we do just that when at times we may feel like it's like we want to be stressed out or we feel we're getting stressed out. How do we work with that? So look, I'm not here to push paranoia or politics. I'm here to provide perspective. My perspective, a perspective that you can use, hopefully use to refine your perspective and preparedness. Remember, as I talk about this stuff, I'm trying to speak about facts. I'm not trying to give you my perspective. If a fact challenges your perspective, that's great. Having our perspectives challenged is how we refine our perspective. Having a more refined, accurate perspective leads to better decisions and actions down the road, and that's what we should all want. So if this hits home, right, if this video, if you're going, hey, this thing, like, I get this, right, take a second to subscribe, and if you know someone who should hear this, send it to them so maybe they can, maybe that little act can make all the difference. Now, with that, let's go ahead and get into this episode. To start with, I want to tell you about my perspective from my experiences. I'm going to give you my direct experiences about my interactions in indirect and direct ways with the Iranians, with the Quds forces during my time overseas, and where my position comes from, right? So it's important to understand. If we understand where a person comes from, then we can understand what comes later. Now, if you just want to jump right ahead to where I talk about the tips and all this, how to prepare, you don't want to hear about any of this, you can fast forward through probably a good third of this, and you'll get to where I start talking about the tips, what to expect and all that when we get into survival, safety, and self. So when it comes to mindset, I spent 10 years overseas. Over 2,000 days on the ground in Iraq. That's about 5.5 years on the ground, boots on the ground in Iraq. For about 2 years, I worked with Blackwater down in Al-Hilla, where we did diplomatic protection. Another year, I worked with Dying Corps, where we escorted police officers, American police officers that were trained Iraqi police officers. We drove them around the country so they go train Iraqi police. So I did PSD work over there, personal security detail work, because I'm a high-threat security detail. Then I went to work for the Department of State, and I spent a year working with the Office of Mobile Security Deployments, MSD. It's a special operations branch of the State Department, and they contract out their medical support. So I spent a year there where I did a deployment to Pakistan, which at the time was like the R&R recoup area for the Taliban. Then I went to work in Iraq, where I worked with a team of people to stand up the guard force at the U.S. consulate in Basra, Iraq. And at the time, it was the world's largest consulate. I worked there for about a year, left there, and went up to Baghdad. I took over overseeing the guard force there in Baghdad, working with the regional security officers, the diplomatic security agents, and all that to make that guard force happen, which it's a big guard force, as you can imagine. After all, I assume that the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is still the world's largest embassy. When I was there at the time, at least, it was the world's largest embassy. It's a monster compound. It was a huge undertaking on the guard force there. While I was in Baghdad, obviously when I was working with Blackwater and driving around the country, that's when the Iranians were attacking with EFPs, explosively formed projectiles. I think now they call them penetrators. They're called EFPs, and it's a explosive charge that has a copper plate that gets heated up so much in the explosion that it inverts, and it turns into a molten ball of copper that just tears up everybody inside. It burns through armor, and it tears up everyone inside the vehicle. Those were all supplied by the Iranians. And so that was my first experience. Then when I was overseeing the guard force in Baghdad, when Obama had his line with Bashar al-Assad about the chemical weapons that were supposedly in Syria, there was a strong likelihood that President Obama was going to attack Syria. And the local militias had the word. They had been ordered by Iran that if the United States attacked Syria, actually they told the militias that if they saw on CNN that the U.S. was bombing Syria, that they were to overrun and take the embassy in Baghdad. It doesn't matter how big the embassy is. Yeah, they could put up a pretty good fight for a while, and I know some of the particulars of how they were going to attack. I'm not going to get into that. And at the end of the day, I think it would be a lot like what happened in 1979 in Iran, where the embassy would be overrun. Like, you're not going to stop a city with thousands of people determined to take an embassy, no matter how big it is. So when that happened, I had the interesting experience of, hey, you're sitting here in this island surrounded by a bunch of people who don't like you, going, wow, I hope if this happens that I survive, right? And that's the thing. But then you're thinking like, and I remember what happened to the Iran hostages, and those dudes were all captured and taken and held hostage. And so you're sitting there going, wow, this kind of sucks, right? Like the only good way out of this is if we don't do anything. So I remember I was hoping, like, oh, please don't bomb them. Please don't bomb them. And at that time, we had scaled back the embassy because we thought this might happen. So they let non-essential personnel go and they sent them out. So, you're sitting there. It's like, all right, how's this going? It kind of reminded me of feeling like maybe they did very early on at the Alamo, obviously not comparing it to what went down totally at the Alamo, but where you're sitting there going, all right, well, let's see how this works out. So I have that experience. I've been through that. And I can't imagine right now being in the embassy right now. Those people that are there, they've drawn down, they got the guard force and they've made their plans and they're sitting there. it's that's a crummy feeling to be in, right? Like that's a difficult spot to be in. So my heart goes out to them. I hope everything's okay, and I hope that Iran doesn't do anything, because if they do anything, then I think in my opinion, it's going to be, we're going to respond, right? People are going to want to respond if some Americans get killed. And the embassy and all the different government annexes and small military bases and this and that, we're ringing Iran. Like, we have a ring of bases and diplomatic missions and stuff around the country of Iran. And they're kind of like the canary in the coal mines. And it's also kind of, I don't know, sometimes I think it's like hanging a pork chop out in front of a pit bull, right? So it's a luscious looking target if you really want to get after it. So I feel for all those people now. In the mindset stuff, the big thing about a lot of this is I have to work to not hate the Iranians. And I know some people may say, why not just hate them? Like, they're up to this, they're up to that. That's what everybody says and believes, right? Well, if you've listened to me, and if you've listened to any of my lectures and my talks on situational awareness, you know that when we get into our decision-making process, the bottom of the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act, when we get into that decision-making process, if we have any injection of emotion, what is emotion? It comes from our lizard brain. So we're injecting some level of the fight, flight, or freeze response into our decision-making process. What does that mean? It means we have an increased likelihood of making a less rational-based decision. That means that we increase the potential for making possibly not our best decisions. And as we all know in the world of preparedness, man, when the chips are down, you have to make good decisions. You don't have to, but it sure doesn't help the situation for sure, typically, if you don't make a good decision, if we don't make a good decision. So why do I try not to hate? Because hate's an emotion. It's a strong emotion. Think about hate. Think about something you hate, something you really, really dislike that you go, oh, I might hate that. Think about how that makes you feel. Right? That's a strong emotion. If you want to compare it to something, keep thinking about what you hate. Keep thinking about something you really dislike and get it so you can feel it in your bones, in your body. Chew on it. And then immediately shift to something you really love. Someone you really love. A beautiful thing. Something that makes your heart swoon. Something that makes you feel good. Notice that shift in your body. You can tell. If you work at it, you can tell. Well, with my PTSD over the years, I spent a lot of time not feeling good. I spent a lot of time angry. And anger is right there with hate. And it really screwed up my decision making. And now that I made it through it, I don't want to give up that energy to feeling that not great sensation that comes along with hate. I'm reminded of, if you remember the original Red Dawn, Patrick Swayze, Jennifer Grey, Charlie Sheen, or was it Emilio Estevez? I can't remember. It was all like that original one, right? Remember there's the one scene there where homeboy's like sawing off his shotgun and Powers Boot, the pilot's like, hey, man, don't let all that hate burn you up. And he smiles back and he says, well, at least I'll be warm. Yeah, sometimes you can lean into it, I guess, if you need to. But it's not a good thing to carry around all the time. And again, it can cloud our decision making. So, what does that mean? It means that I try to figure out, and I know a lot of people don't believe in this, but I try to figure out a person's why. There's a historian, like him or not, I enjoy his stuff, makes me think. I like to think, and I like to challenge my perspective and refine it. So if you challenge your perspective, you refine your perspective, you make better decisions. So his name's Daryl Cooper, and Daryl Cooper does something that I guess I've done for a while, but he captured it pretty well. When he looks at history, and he looks at somebody back in history, and he tries to understand what was going on historically, because you want to know why, right? It's the why. We can look at events and go, oh, that was an interesting event. But if you don't want to make the mistakes of the past, or you want to capitalize on the things that you got right in the past, you need to identify, you need to look at and figure out the why. So Daryl Cooper says that if you're going to look at somebody in history, and since history is pretty much, I mean, we can look at, geological history, but if you really want to look at history, what are we looking at? People. So he says, if you really want to study and understand a person and understand how they got to something, you want to understand the historical context of something, you need to look at everybody as if they were an innocent, 3-year-old. Like they were a little kid. They were an innocent little kid that, somehow the canoe of life took them down some crazy path. And I'm not saying some people just don't, have a few screws loose and they're not wired too tight. There's that. But then you want to understand that. You want to try to understand that because, again, what are we doing? The more understanding we have, the better decisions we can make. The better the predictions we can make. Because what is situational awareness, right? It's an understanding of the elements. Me, you, this podcast, your car if you're listening into it, your house, all the different little elements that make up your personal environment, make up our personal environments. Once we understand the individual elements, then we compare them all to each other. We find out how are they all related? What do they have going on? How are they moving, repelling, assisting? What's going on with all these? And we get an understanding about how everything is right now. And then what do? We project what's going on in the future with it. That's how we roll through situational awareness. Get an understanding of all the individual pieces, get an understanding of how they're all relating to each other right now, and then we make future projections. So we want to have the best information possible when it comes to trying to do all that. So we work to understand. We work to figure out a person, an entity, a society's why, because that helps us predict what's going to happen down the road. So in order to do that, we have to understand how they got there. We have to understand the past, and we have to look at that honestly without putting shade on it. So that's what I want to cover down on now. I want to talk a little bit about how I go about not hating on Iran and saying, hey, I kind of understand their perspective. Doesn't mean I agree with it. Doesn't mean it changes anything. I don't know. What I do know is at least I'm seeing something through their eyes so I can make a better prediction about how they're going to react. Because in the end, that's how I'm going to keep myself, my family, my friends, and all that as safe as possible. All right, everybody. So now I want to talk about the history of the Iranian government, because obviously you hear so much about that. A bunch of them have been killed in these Israeli strikes. What will the Iranian government do? Will they get their teams of terrorists around the world activated? What will they do over there? Will they want peace? Do they want to back off? What's going on with the Iranian government, right? That's the big question that's going out there. They're the ones that, depending on what actions they take, as I said earlier at the intro, that they kind of had control of how this is all going to go right now. So the real problems, though, began not now and not in 1979 with the revolution, but the real problems with the Iranian government, at least the problems that the West has with it, started the ball rolling in 1925 when the British installed their favorite Iranian, which was a guy named Reza Shah. You'll hear the name Shah over and over again throughout the years, as the leader of Iran. And unfortunately, old Reza Shah, he liked the leadership style, and he liked the style of people like the Nazis at the time, which were, rolling back there in the 30s, and with whom he developed strong ties. So while he did some good for Iran, he pushed a bunch of aggressive modernizations efforts. He built railroads and schools and modernized their military at the time. He also did it through Nazi-inspired authoritarian control, and as a result, He sidelined their parliament. He cracked down on dissent. He censored the population. He just made people miserable. He stripped power from the clergy, all that kind of stuff. So while Iran looked like some sort of modernization was going on the surface, underneath, it was tied to the Nazis. So many of the people definitely were having issues with what was going on, and they tied that back to the British foreign influence and all that. Well, World War II breaks out in 1941 because of his ties to Nazi Germany. The Allies are like, hey, dude, you got to go. So they forced Reza Shah out. One would kind of think they might go to a completely different person. Maybe they did a little bit, but they gave the power to Reza Shah's son, Mohammad Reza, the younger Shah. Though he didn't have his father's grip on the country, and that opened space for a political movement to take off. And that movement was led by a guy named Mohammad Mossadegh, a nationalist who believed in Iranian independence. He did not want this outside influence from the West and all that. So in 1951, Mossadegh got elected. He became prime minister, and he immediately kicked the British out. And he took over the British oil fields. The British were over there. They controlled all the oil fields. So he nationalized Iran's oil as he kicked the British out. The West, not being cool with that, orchestrated an Iranian coup in 1953, which was backed by the CIA, who launched, if you want to look it up, it was called TP Ajax Project or Operation Ajax. Look up TP-Ajax project, and MI6 was also involved, and the coup took Mossadegh out of power and put the Shah's family back in power. From there, it was full speed autocracy. Remember the whole Nazi thing going on, right? They liked that form of government, so they started the Savak, which is a secret police. Think like Gestapo type secret police, Stasi type secret police, that kind of thing. They didn't allow any political opposition, and it was able to do all of that because it had the support of the U.S. and the West propped up the regime for oil and control over the region because Iran had influence. And as the years passed, the people became more and more, larger and larger numbers, became more and more irritated with living under what they looked at was an authoritarian dictatorship. And so by the 1970s, resentment had grown and it became widespread across a significant enough portion of society. And that large segment of society looked at the 1953 coup as a symbol of foreign interference, and the Shah was seen as a puppet of the West. They didn't like this guy, so they're not going to cut him a break saying, oh, yeah, you're a puppet and all that. They just like, this isn't happening. So in 1979, it all blew up. That's when the Islamic Revolution happened, and that corner of the world went from bad to worse. Why? Because what the Brits started in 1925 by installing a meathead authoritarian dictator. And then in 1953, after Mossadegh had been elected in office by the majority of the people, right, the West doubled down on that dictator and used the CIA and the MI6 to oust the elected leader of their country in favor of the Nazi-inspired leadership of the Shah. Now, did everybody suffer under the Shah? No, not everybody did, but a significant enough portion of the country did that they rose up. And so, of course, the 1979 Iranian Revolution happened, right? The people of Iran were really ticked off, and it's a problem that went back to all the way to 1925 about decisions, pragmatic decisions that were made in 1925. I imagine then they had no idea that they were going to cause this hornet's nest of problems down the road, but that's what happened. So that's one thing to look at when looking at from the Iranian perspective. Now, remember, before we get into this next item of the Iranian perspective, you don't have to agree with what they're doing. But understand, this is what the people that did the revolution, this is how they look at things. That's what's important here. And then again, we'll get into tips and all of that. So now let's go ahead and talk about the Iran-Iraq war, because the trouble between the U.S. and Iran didn't end with the hostage crisis in 1979 and when Reagan got into the office and got the hostages back. A major flashpoint between Iran and the U.S. and the West also came during the 8-year Iran-Iraq war, which lasted from 1980 to 1988. So the Iranian Revolution 79, boom, Iran-Iraq war starts up magically in 1980. And it was one of the most brutal, bloody, and underreported wars of the 20th century. I've seen some videos of it. It was nasty. Look, there's no such thing as a good war, right? There's no such thing as not a nasty war. That's why war is the word war. It's not like it's some flower word. So it was a war that cost over 1 million lives and set the stage for the modern Middle East endless string of just crazy disasters, conflicts, and all the stuff that's happened over there. So it kicked off in 1980 when Saddam Hussein, who was feeling super froggy after Iran's 1979 revolution, threw out the Shah. Saddam decided it was a good time to go invade old Iran, go invade his neighbor and pick off some Iranian oil fields. He believed Iran was weak. He figured they were divided. They just had this revolution happen and they were ripe for exploitation. So he wanted to steal the oil-rich region of Khuzestan. I'm probably totally butchering that name, and shut down Iran's growing influence and prove that he was the big boss man in the Gulf. And he didn't count on Iran, though, turning it into an 8-year bloodbath. He thought he was going to roll over him like the U.S. would roll over him in the Gulf War I. Didn't happen that way. And so this is where the U.S. comes in. Because after the Shah was ousted, America lost its favorite little puppet in the region, right? They knew the Iranian regime led by Khomeini wasn't having any of it. It wasn't having any of their stuff. Matter of fact, they had the hostage crisis going on. They had Iran shouting death to America. All that started in that 79 time frame. So go figure, you install a dictator who does terrible things to people, and those people later have an attitude towards you. So never letting a good conflict go to waste, what does the U.S. do? They started supporting Iraq and Saddam Hussein. That's how Saddam Hussein got so powerful. It was the Iran-Iraq war. And I guess it makes sense. If you lose one Nazi-inspired ruler, you go find yourself another brutal dictator who is willing to gas his own people. So yeah, we started supporting Saddam in his war efforts. And by 1982, the U.S. was passing satellite intel to the Iraqis and helping them target Iranian troop movements. Even while Saddam was dropping chemical weapons, we were doing that. So the U.S. knew what was going on. Everyone knew, but Iraq was being a thorn in the side of the Iranians. So everybody looked the other way. And to make things even more complex, while all of that was happening, the Reagan administration was also secretly selling arms to Iran to fund anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua. You can't make this up. That mess became the Iran-Contra affair, and if it's a rabbit hole I'm not going to go dive into right now, but it's wild. Now, if you want to know more about that, actually, go watch the movie American Made with Tom Cruise. It's a good little look into that. It's a pretty good movie there. So the Iran-Iraq war also found France supplying Iraq with fighter jets and missiles. The Soviets were handing over tanks and weapons. Remember all those fighters and all those tanks and stuff we blew up in Gulf War I and all that? Yeah, that's where all this stuff came from. Germany, it helped build Saddam's chemical warfare capabilities, right? Remember those WMDs? Yeah, Germany and some other countries supplied them. They weren't making them. They didn't have that. Remember, it was what did they show in the Congress there, Colin Powell show? It was the milk truck driving around that was supposed to be a chemical weapons factory or something on wheels. No, man, but they did have WMDs that they got out of their allies. So Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, they gave them tens of billions of cash and loans. And meanwhile, North Korea, China, they were selling weapons to Iran. Even Israel, yes, Israel, they quietly funneled arms to Iran too, because it wanted both sides to destroy one another. So by the end of the war, Iran lost upwards of 750,000 people, including civilians some of whom were gassed in wave after wave of Trent-style warfare. Iraq lost around 500,000 people, and civilians were bombed, cities were hit with missiles, and over 100,000 Iranians were victims of chemical weapons. So it was, in a lot of aspects, a World War I level slaughter with modern tech and the West supporting it, right? So the war eventually ended and ended in a stalemate, but the consequences didn't end, right? Iraq was broke, man. They were broke at the end of it, and they were bitter, which led Saddam to take all that military hardware and invade Kuwait in 1990, dragging the U.S. back in for the Gulf War. That's how that all got started. So Iran came out bloodied, but they came out more radicalized and entrenched in anti-U.S. mindset, right? They're like, hey, man, you led all this stuff to happen to our people. And through it all, America had a hand on both sides of the scale, helping Iraq with one hand while sneaking deals with Iran with the other. So I'm not stating opinion. This is all fact that happened. And again, this is to understand, why do the Iranians hate the West so much? Why do they call us the great Satan and all this? So if you're wondering how the modern Middle East got so screwed up, this is a big part of it. The Iran-Iraq war didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the result of decades of foreign meddling, short-sighted power plays, and a willingness to put bad people into power for political and, financial objectives. And honestly, when you step back and look at it all, the coups, the dictators propped up, the double dealing during the war, it's not hard to understand why many Iranians have a deep resentment towards the U.S. and the West. If I was in their position, I might have an axe to grind too if my family or people I knew were killed with poison gas or this kind of stuff. I mean, we have that with them. It's one of the reasons I work to not hate them. And I try not to hate, but I can understand why people, if that was me, I'd probably be that upset too. So I get it. I believe that if it were any of us, many of us would be singing the same similar tunes, because we do that here. If people attack the United States, what happens? We all get motivated like, hey, we have to go get some. I think it's the same way. So with that, now let's talk about what does it all mean? What does all that craziness that I just went over mean? Well, one, it means that everything's on the table and you don't have any control of anything other than yourself. You and I can't control how the Iranians feel. You and I can't control what our government does. We can't control what other governments do. So what does that mean? It means let's back out sometimes if we're getting too deep. I'm guilty of that myself. It means back out, look at the common humanity of, hey, it's all beyond most of our control. When you pull out of it, you can allow yourself not to be so attached to it. And then you could have good discussions, and good discussions lead to refined points of view, refined perspectives, better situational awareness. I love, and hey, Pete Robertucci, if you're listening, I love when we go back and forth on Facebook. I love people that challenge me. It makes me look at my perspective. It makes me look at my point of view, my belief system and all that and go, okay, am I getting everything right? Do I think I'm right? Is there a way I can improve it? What are they seeing? Sometimes I may not buy what the other person's saying on everything, but it makes me go, well, I'll keep an eye out for that a little bit more. Makes me better over time. We all need to look at that. It's not part of the problem now is not everybody, but most people, a lot of people are so attached to their belief systems that they take it personally if someone doesn't agree. It doesn't always have to be that way, but that's the way our system seems to be evolving a little bit. Now, I mentioned that everything is on the table, and what does this all mean? And it means that, well, everything's on the table for Iran. They could say, hey, uncle, I want to get on board with whatever you're telling me I need to do. No nuclear, this and that. Hey, BlackRock, come in and rebuild our country and make it this great, prosperous country, whatever. Maybe that's, maybe that's one thing that they can do. And based upon their history, what Iran's been through, the people that are in charge now, another thing is that they could just double down. Like, hey, we're getting more rockets, more missiles and this and that. We're going to keep hitting Tel Aviv. Maybe they double down and they hit the U.S. I talked about that being in the embassy, right? We ring Iran with bases and embassy annexes and this and that. There's a lot of targets out there for them to hit. And there are proxies around the world, even possibly here in the United States, a lot of people talk about. I've talked about on this show. They could attack the U.S. homeland. They could attack Europe. They could do something that is so drastic, we end up getting drug into a broader war and boots on the ground. That's all on the table. And right now, we're in a holding pattern, though. Traditionally, when they do terrorist attacks, they love to do dates that are significant to them. 9/11, there's all kinds of special dates that you have going back 100 plus years that matter to them, which justify, hey, it would be great to do an attack on that day. Another thing to consider is it doesn't take many bad actors when tensions are really high and people have a good capability. One or two people can cause a lot of damage. It doesn't take many people to make something happen that causes events to spin away and spin out of control, or relatively out of control, end up in a 20-year war in Iraq. Heck, today there was I don't know the details of who the shooter is yet, but there was an attack on a church in Michigan today. Guys outside started shooting at the church. Security guard gets shot, was trying to engage with him. A security guard gets shot in the process. Another security guard or church parishioner, someone that was at the church, ran the shooter over with his truck. And then after he ran him over with his truck, the security guard that had been shot in the leg by the shooter shot the shooter. Yeah, that happened today. There was also a church burned in Syria today, so who knows what that's tied to. I mean, Syria, the leader of Syria, is a former member of Al-Qaeda who we did have like a $20 or $30 million bounty on his head, so maybe they're out burning churches there. Who knows? Now, as I said, it's wait and see what happens. Do they hit people right away? Do they wait? Do they say, hey, we don't want any of this? Do they attack Israel again? Right? Do they get stockpiled on missiles and weapons from their allies? Do they hit the West? Just thinking about that for people that are here in the West, and I know we have some listeners down in Australia, Madagascar, and Europe, the UK, and all that. So for all of us in the West, right, that can be stressful. So when we go out, there's some things we should do now. Not be overwhelmed with it, but when we go out, we should do a little mental risk versus reward. Hey, is this a really big venue, or is this a big event? Is this something that has significance to somebody? Think about that. And if we do go out, we decide, yeah, I'm still going to go out. Like, I want to go do this. Maybe it's just going grocery shopping. Have a plan. Don't live in fear and all that stuff, but think, okay, if something happens here, what am I going to do? Something happens when I'm in this corner of the store. When you get to the corner of the store, you don't have to think about it before you go in necessarily. You could think about it when you walk in and say, hey, if I get in the store and some crazy lunatic comes running in the store and I'm 2 feet in the store, I'm going to run to the back of the store. Or if I start walking the store and I see some crazy lunatic run in the store ahead of me, I'm going to turn around and go to my car. That kind of stuff. You can live in the moment, think about it, move on to your next objective, next corner of the store. Oh, I'm in this corner of the store. This is where I have to go if I want to get out of here. Right? Have that mindset of, I'll just really quick, there's a lot of people talk about different ways, but think about the run, hide, fight mindset. I'm not a big fan of the whole hide thing, maybe, because then if you're snuckered down, you're not up and looking around. Sometimes I think there's the, run, get out of the way, and then there's the fight. But hey, everybody does what they got to do. Think about that stuff. What's my capability? Do you have the knowledge, skills, and resources? What are you carrying for your EDC now when you go out? I have my concealed carry. I'm not a big concealed carry person. I don't like carrying a gun on me all the time. And I do now. So, do you have a concealed carry permit? What are you able to do? You live in constitutional carry state. What are you carrying with you out there? Then, having situational awareness, man. Looking around. Understand what's happening. Listening to podcasts like this, even if I'm irritating you. Listening to a show like this. Listening to other shows. Listening to Casual Preppers. All the different podcasts that are out there. Watching YouTube videos. Talking with friends. Getting your network going. Right? With stuff being a little bit hot right now and the summer of love. I mean, it's not even July yet, right? We got all these kind of concerns and worries going on. Reach out to your network of friends if you haven't already done so. Right? Hey, what are they doing? What are they seeing? What are they feeling? Have conversations. Right? Hey, share this podcast with them. So next, let's talk mentally what to expect. Right? What to expect going down the road. It's the anticipation sometimes that does us in. We don't know what to expect and it overwhelms us. Well, there may be attacks overseas. Whether that's shipping lanes, right? We talked the Straits of Hormuz is right there. I believe it's the Straits of Hormuz. We've talked about U.S. bases, Israel, other countries. Who knows? How does that work out? The possibility of attacks here at home. There's Al-Qaeda, ISIS would probably be happy to do something on Iran's behalf. There's possibility of Iranians doing stuff. There's possibility of lone wolves who just wants to use the opportunity to raise some mayhem. And then think about that. If any of that happens, there's some major attack or, attack here in the homeland, that may lead to boots on the ground. What does that look like? What does that look like for you and your family? What does that look like for soldiers going back overseas and then coming home? We've seen how that works out, right? So all of those, and maybe nothing happens. Maybe it all just quiets down and the summer of love is really the summer of love. But all of it's in the realm of possibility. So go, hey, this could happen. If it happens, go, I expected that. That way, it's not as bad. It's not as surprising, right? What does all of that result in? What's the results of all this? Well, other than the one option where everything goes back to being normal and everybody's happy and hunky-dory and Iran starts exporting fuel to the world and fuel prices drop, prices of goods and oil, because of the impact on the Straits of Hormuz and the impact of oil. I might have mentioned earlier, I don't recall, but I've already seen that diesel fuel in the last few weeks gone up 20 cents. If ships can't get through the Straits of Hormuz, and I'll tell you, something I saw the other day was there's starting to be some empty shelves, and I think it has to do with the tariffs with China and stuff possibly. And if the Straits of Hormuz gets jammed up, that's supply chain issues. Right, so think about, how do I conserve? Do I have everything I need? I'm going down tomorrow to get an oil change, and I'm going to buy an extra set of filters for my truck just to have them. And the next time I get an oil change, I'll use that set of filters and buy a new one. That way I always have a set of filters on hand, that kind of thing. Also, if a war kicks off, if this thing heats up, expect government overreach. It happened after 9/11. We got the Patriot Act. Expect for that kind of stuff to all heat up, right? Expect for the polarization, because no government likes to go to war without everybody cheering them on. So expect that to happen. Expect if we go to war, that there's going to be military deaths like I talked about. There's going to be people coming home busted up. So if you know anybody that's in that age group, start thinking about them. Start getting the support structure ready to help them out. It's a difficult transition. Understand that if this stuff happens, you're going to probably have increase in fear, anxiety, worry, whatever that is. That's why we're talking about this now, to help hopefully limit that. If you find that your anxiety's going up, if you find that your anger's going up, try to pull yourself back out of it. It's not worth it. Like, we can't control any of this stuff. We can't control the people who don't believe the same way we do. It's not worth the anxiety. We're prepared. That's what we do this for. We're ready to go. So look at that. Next up, what to do? How do we deal with all that? Right? Acknowledge it. Okay, yeah, this stuff's real. Acknowledge it. Like, okay, so you're not surprised. It's, sometimes people don't want to acknowledge the problem. They don't. What do we, normalcy bias? I don't want to even admit that's going to be a problem. Acknowledge it. Don't panic. Don't go crazy. Don't got to panic buy. You've been working on stuff. You got stuff together. Go do a little bit more. Don't go broke. Don't go crazy right now, right? Odds are, a month down the road, nothing's going to happen. Everything's going to be fine. Or there was another dust up. Maybe Iran shoots some missiles to make themselves feel good, and then they stop shooting missiles, and everybody's happy. It happened like that before. Just one day, Iran just stopped shooting missiles, and everybody's like, okay, I guess we can go on. So it's going to be what it's going to be. You can't control it. So if we let ourselves panic over it, again, what does that do? Affects our decision-making process. If you get worried, right? If you start finding yourself getting sucked into it from time to time, unplug. Pull yourself out of it. Unplug. Don't watch the YouTube. Don't watch the Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, doomsday this, doomsday that. Listen to me, whatever. Unplug. Talk to a friend. Get a couple friends. Have a little peer group going on. And if something happens, then they text you. Say, I'm going to unplug for the next 2 or 3 days. Back out of this stuff. You don't have to immerse ourselves in it. Like, hey, guess what's happening tomorrow? Probably the same stuff that's happening today. And then after that, and at some point they're going to say, hey, this is what's happened as the next step in this. Iran escalated, they de-escalated, whatever happens. Something's going to happen. But let's not get wrapped around it on this stuff, right? That's not good for us. Give your intuition the benefit of the doubt. We know that. What is that? That's our sixth sense. That's our subconscious. That's pulling together everything we've experienced in our lives. We can't understand it all because with our rational mind, but it's pulling it all together and it's telling us what's going on. So, give it the benefit of the doubt. Listen to your subconscious. Hair standing up. You feel weird. You feel all of a sudden you got some strange, like, hey, I don't know, something's going on or something's not going on. Listen to it a little bit. As we go through all this, be supportive of those around you. Remember, you're into preparedness. You're thinking about this stuff. There's some people who they get to peek at this stuff and it makes them feel bad. They get worried. They don't know. They're not as doomsday-ish maybe as the rest of us or whatever that is. Be supportive, help them through it. That's our job, right? You as the preparedness-minded person, you're there. You're kind of like, the first up the rank structure in the whole, like, let's get through the disaster stuff. So they're coming to you. You're the squad leader, man. Help them out. Hold yourself accountable. You start getting down, you start sloughing off, or you start going down the rabbit hole, go pull yourself out. Go do things. Make yourself, be productive if you're feeling overwhelmed, stressed. Go get outside for a little bit. Sometimes that'll make you feel better. And don't dwell on the bad. You don't have to go sit in the pig pen and sit there and, just sit in the mud. Nah. Choose to be as happy as possible. Try to make yourself happy. Try not to hate on people because you don't like what they're saying, what they're thinking, and all that. Can't change them, man. It's not worth it. It's actually really good practice when they say stuff that irritates you. I'm in some Facebook groups from out west where I grew up, and a lot of those people really irritate me out there. Oh, it's wild. It's straight up wild, man. And it's not. It's a different place than when I grew up, and I look at it, and I guess maybe I'm becoming old and crotchety, right? I'm the angry old dude now. I'm the old Gran Torino kind of guy, and so it's always a good test, though. It's a good test of trying to not let other people's thought processes ruin my day. Like, hey, I've done a lot of prepping in my life. Most of you have. We've earned not having to think about and worry about stuff. We've done it enough, right? That's why we prepare. So anyhow, with that, everybody, I hope you liked this show. I hope you found it good. If you're in the Facebook group, hey, drop a note. Let me know what you think about it. I'll be posting this episode in the group. So with that, everybody, as always, stay safe, secure, and prepared. And never forget, you are just one prep away from being better prepared. Bye for now.